Hello and welcome to the Review of Champions. It's time to talk about Andor, episode 4. With me are Mr. Taylor first
Hey,
and Merv.
Hello.
Before we start talking about this week's episode, I would like to ask you all to hit that like and subscribe button and maybe join our forum on Sakar.freeforums.net. It's that nice little community full of nice fans. You can see a few of them here. We would love it if you sign up and join our conversation. And if you want, you can be on this show as well. We're gonna talk spoilers, so if you haven't seen this week's episode, go check it out first and then come back to the video. For your information, Lord Deathman would normally be moderating, only he isn't available this week, so I'm stepping in, trying to fill his amazing shoes. Well, this week's episode of Andor. Merv, you didn't join us last week for our initial review for the first 3 episodes, so you've been caught up. Tell me, what do you think of the show as a whole until now, and specifically this week's episode?
As a whole, I'm really into it. I mentioned it on the board, but it has a lot of like nice little touches that give it a small world feel. Like there's so many background characters that would normally be unimportant that have speaking lines that are relatable and feel normal, and like everyone has a job and everyone's like, it feels like a lived-in world, and I think that is a big help towards appreciating something like this. And I feel invested in the Andor character, Cassian's character. I think Diego Luna is great. I've liked him for a while. He was in one of my favorite westerns, Open Range, and he's doing an impeccable job here, I think. As far as his character, especially as an adult, he feels intelligent, quick-witted. He feels like he knows what he's doing. There's not this huge learning curve for him to become part of the resistance or useful in this world. He doesn't have like a great gap to jump. He feels like he can fit those shoes right away, no matter what situation you put him in, due to his life so far. And again, as the show as a whole, I didn't really care for the flashback sequences. I thought they were kind of pointless. I just didn't need to see it. But the stuff in the present day, I feel really interested in. I like that the at least main antagonist in the first 3 episodes was this like pre-war security group that had ambitions and that all just kind of blew up in their face, and with some really cool action sequences and stuff like that. Episode 4, with Cassian kind of becoming part of this small, I don't know what you want to call it, like a robbery team, or a squad of people who were planning to rob this garrison full of Imperial guards, I assume. I thought it was really cool. The planet that they're on is interesting, or moon, or whatever it is, and just the way that they all kind of view him as an outsider at the beginning, and then you can see that they're kind of growing respect for him a little bit, or at least he doesn't make himself seem obtuse to the situation. The second they start laying their plans, he is able to question their decision making, point out flaws in it, like he's engaged in their decision making right away. And I thought that just speaks to his character's intelligence and like his essential usefulness to this group, and why I think Clem was the character that, oh no, his name is Clem in this. I can't remember his name. Skarsgård, Luthen character, like why he picked him out of the, heard about him, basically questioned him a little bit during their meeting, and then brought him in to this group. It was all very entertaining. I'm very excited to see where it goes from here, especially if it's going to take on more of like a heist vibe. If it does that properly, I feel like it's going to be a very interesting series, at least this first story arc.
Yeah. Taylor, there was on Coruscant. We got to see Coruscant again, and I always enjoy going there. I'm not the biggest fan of the prequels, but I certainly don't hate them. And Coruscant was, of course, properly introduced in Attack of the Clones. We get a whole a little side plot or something, or not even a side plot. I think we are looking at the birth of the rebellion, with Mon Mothma speaking to Luthen. I thought that was a very interesting small sequence in the greater Star Wars picture. Do you agree?
Yes, 100%. I thought that scene, that whole sequence was very, very good and very interesting. Mon Mothma, I'm sorry, I always mispronounce that name, but that character has never made much of an impression on me. I usually forget that she exists until she comes up again in another movie or series, and I say, oh yeah, she was in the other one. But I think she's going to play a pretty big role in this series, and the actress playing her is great. We met her husband, who apparently is not aware that she's starting a rebellion, so that's gonna come to a head. And then seeing the other guy, Luthor. Again, these names are killing.
Yeah.
Luthen. Seeing Luthen in his cover identity, and it was very interesting when he changed his clothes and put on his wig. And if you notice, he just did this little subtle thing where he got into character, and that was brilliant. It was just amazing, and that's all he had to do. They didn't have to tell us anything. They didn't have to have a long scene or a long discussion. It was just, I changed clothes, I changed my wig, and I become this other person. He was an actor. So I thought that was great. The whole show the cinematic quality of this show is really, really amazing. It's just the wardrobe is gorgeous. The scenery on that planet where they're going to do the raid, and then the human side of it is also really good. Like Merv was saying, all the people feel very real, and all the dialogue feels very real. It doesn't feel like some kind of pseudo Shakespeare stuff or speeches and stuff. It's just the way people would talk for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
And Andor himself is great, and we're seeing how he's being pulled into this. Doesn't really want to do it. Gets made a good offer, and now he's part of this cell, this group that is going to do this raid on a Imperial target, which they've obviously been planning for a very, very long time. And I love all the detail that they're putting into the planning and the preparation for this, and how there's only one tiny little window where this astronomical phenomenon of some sort happens that's going to prevent the TIE fighters from chasing them. So it all has to be timed out, and it's all thorough. And again, the characters all feel very, very real and very, committed, but they don't feel. They're very three-dimensional. All the characters so far. The tone of the show is very, very, very different from, anything we've seen in Star Wars before. I think I mentioned that last week, and that's not a bad thing. I like, that Star Wars is expanding and trying different things. But it feels like I said, it feels like a movie. It feels like a period piece movie, like a historical epic from like the 70s or the 80s. Like The Duelists or something, if you've ever seen that movie. The way it's shot, the way the color, the scheme, the lighting, everything just feels very rich in that way. So I'm really enjoying it.
Yeah, there also were a few scenes with the policemen from last week, where they basically get thrown off their post, and he goes to visit his mom, which I thought was kind of cute. And there's a whole side plot of people investigating in what I think is headquarters. That thing that is left or was supposed to be traded in episode 3 between Luthen and Cassian. I actually didn't care too much for that. I know it shows how the Empire gets involved in chasing Cassian, I guess, but yeah, I've seen this all a little bit too much, like an ambitious person that gets stopped and probably she's right. Doesn't it sounds like Riva to me again, if you know what I mean, Taylor.
Yeah, I understand what you mean, and I agree with that part. The showing of they're trying to get ahead and one up each other and get the boss's attention. And again, that it didn't bother me, but I didn't need it either. What I liked about that sequence though was the attention to detail, and how it did feel like the way these types of organizations, these intelligence organizations, actually operate, and the way they actually work, and the way they gather information and try to connect dots. And it makes me feel like the makers of this show did some research or got some technical advisors. And a lot of times in Hollywood, you can tell that the people who wrote this thing have no idea what they're talking about when they're dealing with military things or business things, whatever the topic is, medical thing, whatever the topic is. You can tell that they're just making this up out of whole cloth. Whereas back in the day, here I am again, but back in the day, like in the 60s and 70s, movies and TV shows, especially like dealing with military things, they're either written by veterans of World War II in Korea, or they have technical advisors, like the great classic TV show from the 60s, Combat, starring Vic Morrow, had a U.S. Army technical advisor in the credits of the scene, which is why probably why it always felt very real relative to other military type shows on TV. And it feels like this show has gone to that extra effort to actually, either do a whole lot of research or talk to someone or get someone who understands how an intelligence organization, an intelligence information gathering organization, a law enforcement agency actually operates and interacts, and how they have to make calls about, make priorities. I'm not gonna look into that. If you bring me something more, then maybe I will. Right now I'm focused over here on this area, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. It gave me like the feeling of what the Empire is, a bureaucratic monster, basically.
Exactly.
I mean, of course, in the movies we get to see like the Emperor and Anakin Skywalker, the very top of the Empire's power structure, the Sith Lord and his student, the apprentice. But yeah, the bureaucratic
Right.
the people that actually run the Empire for the Emperor. That part I do think is very interesting. Merv, I don't know how much of a Star Wars fan you are. You haven't been joining us before on Star Wars shows, I think. How do you see this show compared to the rest? I mean, is it a totally different tone? Last week we said it had a lot of things in common with Rogue One. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, and I enjoy Star Wars, but I wouldn't call myself like a really big Star Wars fan. I wasn't even sure if I was going to check this show out until I heard some good things about the first couple episodes, and I was like, I'll see if I can squeeze it in. But so this, whenever we were talking about the tone of this show compared to other Star Wars, like this one feels, for lack of a better word, dirty. Like it feels like we're on street level, rebellion type stuff, and that's kind of the same way Rogue One felt a lot of the time. There wasn't a whole lot of like, heroes necessarily or optimism. Like it wasn't, these grand musical scores in the background. It was like, gray characters doing gray things for what they deem to be their own best interest. And I think you see that right away with the Andor character when he's making a decision about killing another guard or letting him live. Well, he killed him, you know what I mean, in the back in the first episode.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's very important, especially any of these franchises, or you know, whether we're talking MCU or anything that gets this big, you know, Star Wars. It's good to have different tones because you get sick of the same flavor over and over again. At least I do, and I feel like a lot of people are similar. Like, you want to see it from different aspects. You want to see different stories being told. You don't necessarily, you want this. It's nice to see the same world, but you don't need the same feeling every time. You know, we can get different, you know, tones, different vibes, different themes, different genres. You know, like it can still be the sci-fi genre, but make it feel less like a war epic and more like a Western or something like that. You know what I mean? Like there's a million different ways to do it. And I think so far this is succeeding in, like, you know, exciting your taste buds for a new Star Wars television show. Like, it doesn't feel like any of the other Disney. Well, it feels a little bit like maybe The Mandalorian in a couple different ways, but it didn't feel like Obi-Wan for sure. You know,
Yeah,
it definitely doesn't feel like the movies.
it's not like a saga of good and evil
Yes.
and people fighting with lightsabers and a political intrigue and with people trying to seize power and stuff like that. It's basically very grounded, very down to earth, literally, and people trying to make the best of their living situation and slowly trying to change things. Of course, we get the, like I say, this is the birth of the rebellion.
Right. All that other stuff feels very much like a fantasy, you know, like
Yeah.
a high fantasy with magic and wizards and knights and it's all good. I love all that Star Wars stuff, but this is like, well, what else is happening in this galaxy? People who don't rely on the Force for all this stuff, or people who don't control an entire empire and things like that. So it's like you said, it's just a much more grounded portion of this universe.
Yeah. Moving, looking a little bit forward. How do we see Andor moving on? Do we see him sticking with this group, or does he get pulled out again and move on to other things? What do we expect of this show? Want to show us about Cassian Andor's development?
I hope he sticks with this group a little bit. You know, just to bring it back a little bit to the, I guess, politician side of things, or the people who are like bureaucrats in the Empire. I was a little worried whenever they introduced them, because I'm like, we already had the security team. We've introduced like several antagonists there. I don't need 8 antagonists in the show, you know. So I was worried it was going to be too many characters there, and I would feel the same way if they pulled Andor out of this group and put him in another group and had him moving around, and you're not really making connections with these characters that he's meeting. So I would like him to be with this group for at least a few episodes. My expectation is that he will be, and that maybe there will be a few losses during this raid that they're going to go on. In what characters that may be, I'm not sure. I feel like the one that appears to be the youngest in the group, I feel like he's dead meat walking. You know, like I don't think he's making it out of that, just because he was immediately like this guy seems nice, you know, like to Andor, and I'm like, yeah, he's not gonna make it. Like he's a red shirt, you know. But
or he is the cat with the 9 lives.
Yeah, and I recognize that actor from Black Mirror, and I couldn't place it for the first several scenes with him, but he's in a Black Mirror episode. He's not a very good character in that episode though. But back to this show. Yeah, so that's kind of what I expect. I hope he builds some camaraderie with this group, in that they're around at least a little bit for this season. I don't want him to do too much bouncing around. I know he's already kind of done that with the first 3 episodes, and like Bix and the people on his home planet, and now he's kind of here. But I would like him to be here until it feels like it's the proper time to move on to something else.
Taylor, were there any negatives about this episode for you?
Not really. I mean, only the one that you mentioned about the internal politics in the Empire, in that one little scene there, that one little section there. And again, it wasn't a big negative for me. Overall, no, I haven't had any negatives. And as far as what's going to happen, of course, a lot of things can happen. Like Merv said, he could be with this group he's definitely going to continue to get more and more involved in the rebellion. There's no doubt about that. He could stay with this group. This whole group might get wiped out on this raid next week. And who knows what? He could be the last man standing, or he could be with them for a while. One thing I do think is going to happen, and I knew that after the first 3 episodes, when all that subversive activity happened on that planet, that the Empire was going to come in and take over and smack that guy around, those security guys around, which they did. But what I think is going to happen eventually is that inspector, whatever rank he is, he's going to get recruited by the Empire. And he's going to become one of these bureaucrats within the Empire, intel gathering guys. And I think he may end up playing a pretty big role eventually going forward through this whole series, I think.
Yeah. Overall, I do agree with you guys' assessment. I also very much enjoyed this episode again, for all the reasons you mentioned. So I'm not gonna elaborate too much on that because no need to repeat. Well, is there anything else to unpack about this week's episode?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out, because maybe I missed it, but whenever Luthen and Mon Mothma are talking, they mention that Mon Mothma wants to bring somebody else into their circle of rebellions, presumably the high-ranking officials in the rebellion. Yeah. I didn't catch if they mentioned who it was. No. I felt like that was a nice little mystery lead. Like, is that is that going to be Leia? I mean, I know you guys kind of joked about bringing teenage Leia in, but that was where my mind went immediately with that.
I don't know if it's Leia, but well, let's speculate a bit. Taylor, you have an idea?
Maybe Leia, maybe Leia's father.
Yeah, Organa.
Now there was one scene. I don't think it was the same scene, but there was one scene where the name Saul Guerrera was mentioned. I picked up on it. They listed a couple of people, points of contact or something that they were referencing, and they mentioned Saul Guerrera. But I don't know I don't think that's the same person that Mon Mothma was talking about.
I think he's more on the ground level than the actual leaders of the rebellion. Sorry, cut you off.
No, it's fun. It was the youngest of their small group was asleep at his post, and the guy, I don't know the names yet, but the guy said if you were working with Saul Guerrera, he'd kill you, or you'd be in a lot more trouble.
That's right.
Well, maybe it's likely that Saul Guerrera will show up at some point in this show. So
yeah, I think that's confirmed actually. That what's his name? Forrest Whitaker.
Yeah. He's in the picture behind you, Grandmaster.
I don't see him.
He's in the lower left-hand corner there. Yeah. Isn't that him in the lower left-hand corner?
Yeah, that's him. That's a
right next to the girlfriend.
Okay. if you guys say so. I probably can't see that at the moment. I'm going left and right, but I only see the girlfriend's face. So. Yeah, sorry. When I edit the video tomorrow, I will definitely take a look. But anyway, let's just move on to rating this show. or this week's episode, I should say. So, what kind of mark are you giving it? Merv, you go first this time.
I'll give it a 9 out of 10. I was really engaged in this. I'm really interested to see where this kind of heist storyline takes it, and I'm excited to see anytime anything like that comes into a storyline. I'm usually excited for it, just to see how the plan unfolds. So I give it a 9 out of 10.
Okay. Taylor?
Yeah, I agree. I give it a 9 out of 10 also.
Okay. I will give it an 8 out of 10. Not that I have major criticisms, but if you may have noticed, I tend to be a little bit more conservative nowadays with my ratings. So 8 out of 10. I think it's fair. Okay. That will conclude our review for episode 4 of Andor. Before we finish, I would like to ask you all to hit that subscribe button, notification bell on YouTube. Follow us on Twitter. Like our Facebook page. Join the forum on Sakar. That way you will never miss us and we won't have to miss you. Bye.